My son put me in a nursing home and forgot me 5 years later. I bought the building and made him my janitor. My name is William, but everyone calls me Bill. I am 82 years old, and this is a story of how my own flesh and blood tried to bury me alive, and how God and my late wife gave me the strength to rise from the grave and teach him a lesson he will never forget. Sit down, my friend. Make yourself comfortable, because this is a long story, and every word of it is true. Let me take you back to the beginning. I was born in 1944 in a small town outside Manchester called Bolton. My father was a coal miner, and my mother worked in a textile factory. We were poor, but we were rich in love. We had a small terrace house with no bathroom and an outside toilet. But my mother kept it spotless, and my father came home every night covered in coal dust and hugged me like I was the most precious thing in the world. I left school at 15 and went to work in the same factory as my mother. I met my wife, Dorothy, when I was 19. She was working in the Woolworth store on the high street, and she had the most beautiful smile I had ever seen. We married a year later and bought a small house with a mortgage that scared us to death. We had 2 children, a daughter named Patricia and a son named Robert. Patricia was my angel. She had her mother's smile and her mother's kind heart. Robert was my boy, my little mate. I taught him to play football. I took him fishing. I carried him on my shoulders. When he got tired, I worked my way up from the factory floor to supervisor and then to manager. I worked 60 hours a week, sometimes 70, but I did it for my family. I did it so my children could have the things I never had, and they did. Robert went to university. He became an accountant. He married a woman named Vanessa from a wealthy family in Cheshire. Patricia became a nurse. She married a good man named David and moved to Australia. Dorothy and I were so proud. We thought we had done everything right. We thought our children would always love us. We were so wrong. 1999 was the worst year of my life. First, my father died. Then my mother followed him 6 months later. And then in December, just before Christmas, Dorothy was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. The doctor took me into a small room and said, "Mr. Johnson, I am so sorry, but your wife has 3 months, maybe 6. I went home, and I didn't know how to tell her. I didn't know how to say the words that would destroy her when I finally did. She just smiled and said, "Bill, we have had 40 wonderful years, and I would not trade one single day of them for anything." That is the kind of woman. She was brave and beautiful and strong. Until the very end, Dorothy fought for 9 months, not 3. She fought like a lioness. She held on to see Patricia get married. She held on to hold her first grandchild. She held on until there was nothing left. And then on a Tuesday morning in September, she looked at me and said, "Bill, take care of our children." And then she closed her eyes and was gone. I held her hand for 3 hours after she died. I couldn't let go. The nurses had to pry my fingers loose. I walked out of that hospital. A different man, part of me, died with her. That day after Dorothy died, I didn't know what to do with myself. I had worked all my life, and now I was retired. I had loved a woman for 40 years. And now I was alone. I stayed in the house we had bought together. I sat in the chair she used to sit, and I watched the television shows she used to watch. I talked to her, photograph every night, and asked her why she left me. Robert came to visit once a month with Vanessa and the children. They would stay for an hour, eat some food, and then leave. Patricia called every week from Australia and cried with me on the phone. She wanted to move to Australia, but I couldn't leave Dorothy. She was buried in the cemetery down the road. And I visited her every Sunday with flowers and talked to her. For hours the years passed slowly, and quietly I got older. My knees started hurting, my hands started shaking, my memory started playing tricks on me. Sometimes I would forget to eat, sometimes I would forget to take my medication. Sometimes I would wake up in the middle of the night and call out for Dorothy, and then remember she was gone and cry like a child. One day in 2018, Robert came to visit without Vanessa or the children. He sat in my living room looking around at the old furniture and the faded wallpaper and the photographs on the mantelpiece. And he said, "Dad, we need to talk." I said, "What about son?" He said, "Dad, you are 80 years old. You live alone in this big house. You forget things. You fall down. You can't take care of yourself anymore." I said, "I am fine, Robert. I have managed for 18 years. I can manage a bit longer." He shook his head and said, "Dad, no, you can't. I talked to the doctor, and he said you should not be living alone. It is not safe." I said, "What do you want me to do, son?" He took a deep breath and said, "Dad, we have found a nice place for you, a nursing home called Willowbrook. It is very nice. You will have your own room and nurses and activities and friends your own age." I stared at him for a long time. I said, "You want to put me in a home, Robert?" He said, "Dad, it is for the best. You will be happy there, I promise." I said, "What about my house?" He said, "We will sell it to pay for the home, and the rest we will save for the children's education." I said, "Your mother And I bought this house together we raised. You in this house, she died in this house. And now you want to sell it and put me in a home? He said, Dad, please don't make this difficult. I am trying to help you. I looked at my son, my little mate, the boy I carried on my shoulders, and I felt something break. Inside me, I said, fine, Robert, do what you want. I'm too tired to fight any more. Willowbrook nursing home was not nice. It was a long, low building on the edge of town with faded paint and broken windows, and a smell that I can only describe as the smell of waiting to die the room. They gave me was small, with a single bed, a wardrobe, a television, and a window that looked out at the car park. The walls were pale green, the color of sickness. The carpet was brown, and stained the bathroom was down the hall, and shared with 6 other people food was terrible gray meat, lumpy potatoes, boiled vegetables that had no taste. The nurses were tired and overworked. They did their jobs, but they didn't care. They didn't have time to care the other. Residents were like ghosts. Some of them sat in the lounge all day staring at the television. Some of them slept in their chairs. Some of them cried or shouted or called out for people who would never come. I sat in my room and looked at the 4 walls and thought about Dorothy and wondered if she could see me from heaven and if she was ashamed of me for letting our son do this to me. Robert came to visit once in the first month. He brought some biscuits and sat on my bed for 10 minutes looking uncomfortable and checking his phone. He said, "Are you okay, Dad?" I said, "I am fine." He said, "Good, well, I will come again soon." And then he left, and I didn't see him for 4 months. The weeks turned into months, and the months turned into years, and Robert forgot about me. He stopped visiting altogether. He stopped calling the nurses, said he never answered their calls. They said the payments from him stopped coming after the first year. I found out later that he had sold my house for £200,000 and kept every penny. He had told me the money would pay for the home, but he lied. He took the money, and he spent it on a new car and holidays and God knows what else, and he left me there to rot. I was a forgotten man, in a forgotten place, no family, no visitors, no future, no hope. I sat in my room day after day, year after year, watching the same 4 walls, watching the seasons change to the window, watching other residents come and go, some left in ambulances, some left in hearses. And I waited for my turn to come. I talked to Dorothy every night. I told her about my day, which was always the same. I told her I missed her. I told her I was sorry. I told her I didn't understand how our son could be so cruel, and she never answered. But I felt her listening. I felt her with me, and that was the only thing that kept me going. After I'd been at Willowbrook for 4 years, a new resident arrived. His name was Frank, and he was about my age. Frank was different from the others. He had money, and he had a family who visited him every week. His daughter came on Sundays with his grandchildren, and they brought him food and books, and they hugged him and kissed him and told him they loved him. I watched him from my window, and I felt jealous and sad and angry all at once. One day, Frank came and sat next to me in the lounge. He said, "I see you watching my family. You look sad." I said, "I am happy for you, Frank. You are lucky." He said, "What about your family? Do they visit?" I laughed a bitter laugh and said, "No, they forgot about me 5 years ago." Frank looked at me with pity and said, "That is terrible. I am sorry." I said, "It is what it is." Frank, we talked for a long time that day, and every day after that we became friends. He told me about his life, and I told him about mine. He was a businessman. He had owned a chain of hardware stores and sold them for a fortune. He had investments and properties and money in the bank. He was at Willowbrook because he had a stroke and needed care, but his family made sure he had the best room and the best care, and they visited him every week. I told him about Robert and the house and the money he stole, and Frank listened and shook his head. He said, "Bill, that is not right. That is your son. He should not have done that." I said, "I know, Frank, but what can I do? I am an old man in a nursing home with no money and no power." Frank looked at me for a long time, and then he said something that changed my life. He said, "Bill, you may not have money, but you have a mind and you have time, and you have me. I can help you, Frank." And I started talking every day about what I could do. He said, "Bill, first you need to know what happened to your money. Did your son really steal it, or did he just mismanage it?" I said, "I don't know, Frank. I never asked. I never looked." Frank said, "Well, we need to find out." He had his daughter bring a laptop to home, and she showed me how to search public records. We looked up the sale of my house, and there it was sold for £210,000 to a developer. We looked up Robert's name and found that he had bought a new car, Mercedes, for £60,000 the same year. He had also taken 2 holidays to Spain and 1 to Greece. We looked up Vanessa's name and found that she had opened a boutique in Cheshire with £50,000 of startup capital. It was all there in black and white: my money, my life, my sacrifice, funding their luxury lifestyle. While I sat in a nursing home eating gray meat and staring at stained carpet, Frank looked at me and said, "Bill, he stole from you and he abandoned you. That is illegal. That is fraud." I said, "What can I do, Frank? I am an old man in a home." He said, you can sue him, you can take him to court, you can get your money back. And more, I said, I have no money for lawyers. Frank said, I have money, and I will lend it to you, because you are my friend, and what your son did is wrong. I cried that night. I cried not from sadness, but from hope. For the first time in 5 years, I had hoped. Frank put me in touch with a solicitor woman named Jennifer, who specialized in elder law and fraud cases. She came to visit me at Willowbrook, and I told her everything. She listened for 2 hours, taking notes and asking questions. And when I finished, she said, Mr. Johnson, this is a clear case of financial abuse and abandonment. Your son took your money under false pretenses and then left you here. Without support, we can win this case. I said, but I have no money to pay you. Jennifer smiled and said, Frank has already taken care of that. And when we win, your son will have to pay all the legal costs as well. Jennifer filed a lawsuit against Robert. It took 6 months for the case to come to court. During those 6 months, I felt alive again for the first time in years. I had a purpose. I had something to think about besides dying Frank. And I talked about the case every day. He encouraged me. He supported me. He became the brother I never had. And when the day of the court case finally arrived, I was nervous, but I was ready. The courtroom was cold and intimidating. Robert was there with Vanessa and a fancy lawyer in an expensive suit. He looked at me with anger and contempt, as if I was the one who had done something wrong. Jennifer started by presenting the evidence: the sale of my house, the money that went into Robert's account, the car, the holidays, a boutique. She showed bank statements and property records and photographs. She called witnesses, including the doctor who had told Robert I needed care, and the social worker who had visited me at home, and the nurses from Willowbrook who testified that Robert had never visited and never paid. Then it was Robert's turn. His lawyer tried to argue that the money was a gift, that Robert had taken care of me for years, that I was confused and forgetful and didn't remember things correctly. But Jennifer had prepared me well. When I took the stand, I looked at my son, my little mate, the boy I carried on my shoulders, and I told the truth. I told him about Dorothy and the house we bought together. I told him about working 60 hours a week to pay for Robert's education. I told him about the day he put me in Willowbrook and the 5 years he forgot about me. I told him about sitting in my room staring at the walls and waiting to die. And when I finished, there was not a dry eye in the courtroom, including the judges. The jury deliberated for only 3 hours before returning with a verdict. They found Robert guilty of fraud and financial abuse. They ordered him to pay me £400,000 in damages and legal costs, and they recommended that the police investigate him for criminal charges as well. For £100,000, it was more money than I had ever seen in my life. I sat in Frank's room at Willowbrook and looked at the check, and I said, Frank, I don't know what to do with this. Frank laughed and said, Bill, you can do anything you want. You can buy a house, you can travel, you can live in luxury for the rest of your life. I thought about it for a long time, and then I had an idea. I said, Frank, I want to buy Willowbrook. Frank stared at me and said, what I said, I want to buy this place. I have lived here for 5 years. I know every corner, every problem, every failing. I know the food is terrible, and the rooms are shabby, and the staff are overworked and underpaid. I want to buy it and fix it. I want to make a place where old people can live with dignity, not just wait to die. Frank looked at me with tears in his eyes and said, Bill, that is the most beautiful thing I have ever heard. And I will help you buy a nursing home is not as easy as buying a loaf of bread. It took months of negotiations and legal work and inspections. But finally the deal was done. I used half of my money to buy Willowbrook outright. I became the sole owner of the building and the business. The first thing I did was fire manager, a woman named Mrs. Petty, who had ignored complaints and cut corners for years. The second thing I did was hire a new chef, someone who actually knew how to cook real food with flavor and nutrition. The third thing I did was refurbish every room: new beds, new carpets, new paint, new televisions, new bathrooms. So no one had to share anymore. I hired more nurses and paid them better wages, so they had time to actually care for the residents. I created a garden with benches and flowers where people could sit outside and feel the sun on their faces. I bought a minibus so we could take residents on outings to the seaside or the park or the cinema. I turned Willowbrook from a place of waiting into a place of living, and the residents loved it. Their families loved it, and word spread quickly. One day, about a year after I bought Willowbrook, I received a letter. It was from Robert. He was writing from prison where he was serving an 18-month sentence for fraud. The letter said, Dad, I know you probably hate me, and I don't blame you. I've had a lot of time to think in here, and I realized what I did was terrible. I took your money. I abandoned you. I left you to rot, and I am so sorry. Vanessa left me after court case. She took the children in the house and everything I have. Nothing now, no family, no money, no future. I am writing to ask if you could ever forgive me, not because I deserve it, but because I am your son, and I have no one else. I read the letter 3 times, and then I folded it and put it in my pocket. I didn't answer it, not right away. I needed to think. I talked to Frank about it. And he said, Bill, only you can decide what to do. Forgiveness is a gift you give yourself, not something you owe to anyone else. I thought about Dorothy and what she would have wanted. She would have wanted me to forgive. She always believed in second chances. She always believed that love could heal anything. 6 months later, Robert was released from prison. He wrote to me again asking if he could see me. I wrote back and said, come to Willowbrook on Tuesday at 2 o'clock. I will be in the garden. When he arrived, I barely recognized him. He looked thin and old and broken. His eyes were hollow and his hands shook. He sat down on the bench next to me, and for a long time, neither of us spoke. Finally, he said, Dad, I am so sorry. I said, I know, son. He said, I don't expect you to forgive me. I just want to tell you face to face how much I regret everything I did. I said, Robert, do you know what I did with the money from the court case? He shook his head. I said, I bought this place, Willowbrook. I own it now. He looked at me with shock and said, you own the nursing home? I said, yes, and I have a job for you if you want it. He said, what kind of job? I said, janitor. You will clean the floors and empty the bins and scrub the toilets, and you will do it every day, and you will see what it is like to work for your food and your shelter, and you will learn humility and respect. And if you do it well for 1 year, I will pay you a wage, and you can live in a small room here and start your life over. He stared at me for a long time, and then he started to cry. He fell off the bench onto his knees, and he cried like a child. He said, Dad, you would give me a chance after everything I did. I said, Robert, you are my son. I will always love you, but love doesn't mean giving you everything. It means teaching you to be a man, and maybe this time you will learn. Robert started work the next morning. I watched him from my office window as he pushed a mop across the floor. He looked humiliated and ashamed, and that's exactly how I wanted him to feel. At first, the other staff and residents whispered about him. They knew who he was. They knew what he had done, but I told them all to treat him with respect, not for his sake, but for theirs, because kindness is a muscle that grows stronger with use. The first few months were hard. Robert struggled with the physical work. He had spent his whole life sitting at a desk, and now his back ached and his hands blistered. He struggled with the humiliation of being seen cleaning toilets by people who remembered him visiting in his expensive car, wearing his expensive suits. He struggled with the loneliness of living in a small room after years of luxury, but slowly he began to change. He started talking to residents. He would sit with them in the lounge and listen to their stories. He would help them to their rooms and fetch them cups of tea. He would smile and joke, and slowly they began to accept him. One day I saw him pushing an old woman in a wheelchair through the garden, and she was laughing at something he said, and I felt a warmth in my chest that I had not felt in years. A year passed, and Robert completed his work as janitor. I called him into my office and said, Robert, you have done what I asked. Now, what do you want to do? He thought for a moment and said, Dad, I want to stay here. I want to work here properly, not as a punishment, but because I've come to love this place and the people in it. I said, what do you want to do? He said, I want to work in activities. I want to organize things for the residents. I want to take them on outings and play games with them and make them smile. I have spent my whole life chasing money and status, and it made me empty. This place and these people have taught me what matters. I hired him as activities coordinator, and he was good at it, really good. He had energy and ideas and a genuine love for the residents. He organized bingo nights and film screenings and day trips to the coast. He started a gardening club and a book club and a reminiscence group where residents shared memories of their youth. The place came alive with laughter and activity, and it was all because of him. Robert and I began to heal our relationship slowly, carefully, like two people learning to trust. After a terrible betrayal, we had dinner together every Sunday in my small flat on the top floor of Willowbrook. We talked about Dorothy. In the old days, we talked about his mother and how much he missed her. We talked about his children, whom he had not seen since Vanessa left him, and I could see the pain in his eyes when he mentioned them. One day he said, Dad, do you think Vanessa would ever let me see the children? I said, I don't know, son, but you can try. So he wrote her a letter, a long letter, explaining how he had changed and how much he loved the children, and how he would do anything to be part of their lives again. A few weeks later, she wrote back. She agreed to let him see them supervised at first, but gradually more often I watched my son play with his children in the garden of Willowbrook, and I thought about Dorothy and how happy she would be to see this. Now I am 82 years old, and I sit in my garden at Willowbrook, watching the residents laugh and talk and enjoy their lives, and I think about the strange journey that brought me here. My son put me in a nursing home and forgot about me, and 5 years later, I bought the building and made him my janitor. But that's not the end of the story. The real story is that he became a good man again, and I became his father again, and we both learned that love is stronger than pain, and Forgiveness is more powerful than revenge, my friend. If you are reading this and you are old and alone and forgotten, do not give up hope. Do not think your life is over. Do not think you have nothing left to give. You have wisdom, you have experience, you have love. And these things are more valuable than any amount of money. Your children may not appreciate you now, but life has a way of teaching lessons. And sometimes the student becomes a teacher and the teacher becomes a student. I have one message for every child reading this story. Your parents are not a burden, they are a treasure. They raised you, they fed you, they clothed you, they sacrificed for you. They stayed up all night. When you were sick, they worried about you, they prayed for you. They loved you with a love so fierce and so deep that you cannot even imagine it until you have children of your own. Do not throw them away when they become old and inconvenient. Do not put them at home and forget about them. Do not take their money and leave them to rot, because one day you will be old too, and you will want someone to love you the way you should have loved them. And to every old person reading this, hold on, hope, hold on to dignity. Hold on to yourself. You are not worthless. You are not invisible. You are not a burden. You are a human being with a lifetime of experience and wisdom and love. And the world still needs you. My name is William Bill Johnson. I am 82 years old. I own a nursing home called Willowbrook, and my son Robert works here as activities coordinator. And on Sundays, we have dinner together and talk about his mother, and we laugh and we cry, and we are family again. And that, my friends, is the greatest victory of all the end.